It was a chilly autumn night, and Tom had just finished a long day at work. He was driving back home, his route taking him through a remote and winding country road. The full moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the deserted landscape. As he drove, Tom noticed the road seemed unusually quiet. He hadn't seen another car for miles. The trees on either side of the road looked like dark sentinels, their branches swaying in the wind. He turned on the radio, but all he could get was static. The only sound was the hum of his engine and the crunch of gravel beneath his tires. About an hour into his drive, Tom saw a figure standing by the side of the road in the distance. As he got closer, he realized it was a woman. She was dressed in a tattered white dress, her long hair obscuring her face. She was holding out her hand, as if trying to hitch a ride. Tom slowed down and rolled down his window. "Are you okay?" he called out. The woman didn't respond. She simply stood there, motionless, her head slightly bowed. Feeling uneasy, Tom decided not to stop. He drove past her, glancing in his rearview mirror. To his horror, she was no longer standing by the roadside. Instead, she was now sitting in his backseat, her face still hidden by her hair. Tom's heart raced as he gripped the steering wheel. "Who are you? What do you want?" he shouted, his voice trembling. The woman slowly lifted her head, revealing a pale, gaunt face with hollow, dark eyes. "I need your help," she whispered in a voice that sent shivers down Tom's spine. Terrified, Tom swerved the car, trying to shake her off. But no matter how fast he drove, she remained in the back seat, her eyes fixed on him. Desperate, Tom pulled over and jumped out of the car. He turned to face the woman, but she was gone. He frantically looked around, but there was no trace of her. Breathing heavily, Tom got back into his car and sped away, hoping to put as much distance between him and the woman as possible. As he drove, he glanced in the rearview mirror again. To his relief, the back seat was empty. Just as he began to calm down, his car radio crackled to life. Through the static, he heard the woman's voice. "Thank you for the ride," she said. "I'll see you again soon." Tom's blood ran cold. He knew he would never take that lonely road again. Jack had always enjoyed night drives. The quiet of the road, the cool breeze through the open window, and the soothing hum of the engine were all perfect for unwinding after a stressful day. One night, after an exhausting shift at work, he decided to take a long drive through the countryside. He knew a scenic route that would eventually loop back to his hometown, allowing him to enjoy a few hours of peace before returning to the chaos of daily life. The moon was bright, casting a silvery light over the deserted highway. Jack turned on his favorite playlist and settled in for the drive. As he left the city behind, the scenery became more rural. Fields stretched out on either side of the road, interrupted only by the occasional farmhouse. He felt a sense of calm wash over him. About an hour into his drive, Jack noticed something odd. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly into the distance. He had driven this route many times before and knew there should have been a turnoff by now. Confused, he checked his GPS, but the screen displayed an error message. Shrugging it off as a technical glitch, he continued driving, assuming he would soon reach a familiar landmark. As the miles rolled on, Jack began to feel uneasy. The road still showed no signs of ending. Worse, he hadn't seen another car or even a single streetlight in what felt like hours. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was stuck at 2:15 a.m. A chill ran down his spine. Something was definitely wrong. Determined to find his way back, Jack took the next turn he saw. But instead of leading to another road, it looped back onto the same highway. No matter how many turns he took, he always ended up back on the same endless stretch of asphalt. Panic set in as he realized he was trapped in some sort of nightmarish loop. Suddenly, his car's radio crackled to life. Static filled the airwaves before a faint voice broke through. "Turn back," it whispered. "Turn back before it's too late." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He tried changing the station, but the voice persisted, growing louder and more insistent. In a state of near hysteria, Jack slammed on the brakes and pulled over to the side of the road. He needed to think. As he sat there, trying to calm his racing thoughts, he noticed a figure in the rearview mirror. It was a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, standing by the side of the road. Jack's blood ran cold. The man stared at him with hollow eyes, his expression blank. Jack quickly locked the doors and tried to start the car, but the engine refused to turn over. The figure began to approach, moving slowly and deliberately. Desperate, Jack pounded on the steering wheel, praying for the car to start. Just as the man reached the window, the engine roared to life. Without looking back, Jack floored the accelerator and sped down the highway. For what felt like an eternity, Jack drove, never daring to slow down. The figure had vanished, but the sense of dread remained. Finally, he saw a flicker of light in the distance. As he drew closer, he realized it was a gas station. Relief flooded over him. He pulled in and stumbled out of the car, rushing inside to find help. The attendant, an elderly man with a kind face, looked up as Jack burst through the door. "You look like you've seen a ghost," the attendant said with a concerned expression. Jack recounted his ordeal, expecting disbelief. But the attendant simply nodded. "You're not the first to get lost on that stretch of road," he said. "It's an old highway, built over a burial ground. Some say the spirits of the restless dead linger there, trapping unwary travelers in an endless loop." Jack shuddered. "How do I get out of here?" The attendant handed him a map. "Follow this route. It will lead you back to the main road. And whatever you do, don't look back." Thanking the man, Jack got back in his car and followed the directions carefully. As he drove, the scenery began to change. The oppressive darkness lifted, and he saw familiar landmarks once more. After what felt like an eternity, he finally saw the lights of his hometown in the distance. Exhausted but relieved, Jack pulled into his driveway and shut off the engine. He took a moment to catch his breath before heading inside. Just as he reached for the door handle, he glanced in the rearview mirror. For a brief moment, he thought he saw the figure standing at the end of the driveway, watching him with hollow eyes. He blinked, and it was gone. Sarah loved driving at night. The world seemed quieter, the roads less crowded, and the stars brighter. After a long week of work, she decided to visit her parents who lived a few hours away in a small rural town. She packed a few essentials and set off around 10 p.m., hoping to arrive before midnight. The first part of the drive was uneventful. She enjoyed the solitude and the peacefulness of the night. The highway stretched out before her, illuminated by the headlights of her car. Occasionally, she would pass through small towns, their streets empty and silent. About halfway through her journey, Sarah noticed her gas gauge was getting low. She decided to stop at the next gas station she saw. After a few more miles, she spotted a dimly lit station on the side of the road. She pulled in, relieved to see it was still open. The gas station was old and run down, with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that read "Open." As she filled up her tank, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She glanced around but saw no one. Just as she was about to dismiss the feeling, she heard a soft voice behind her. "Excuse me, can you help me?" Sarah turned to see a young woman standing by the pump. She was wearing a thin dress that seemed too light for the chilly night, and her long hair partially covered her face. The woman looked pale and tired. Sure, what do you need? Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. My car broke down a few miles back. Could you give me a ride to the next town? The woman asked, her voice trembling slightly. Sarah hesitated. She had always been wary of picking up strangers, especially at night. But something about the woman's demeanor seemed genuine and desperate. All right, I can give you a ride, Sarah finally agreed. Hop in. The woman smiled weakly and got into the passenger seat. As Sarah resumed her drive, she tried to make small talk, but the woman was mostly silent, staring out the window. Every now and then, Sarah glanced at her, feeling a growing unease. After about 15 minutes, the woman finally spoke. Thank you for picking me up. Not many people would have. Sarah nodded. It's no problem. It's not safe to be out here alone at night. The woman smiled faintly but said nothing more. They continued driving in silence. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, and Sarah's unease grew with each passing mile. She tried to check the time on her phone, but it wouldn't turn on. The car's clock was stuck at 11 p.m. Is there something wrong? Sarah asked, trying to hide her nervousness. The woman turned to her, her eyes now wide and filled with fear. You need to be careful. There's something on this road. Something that isn't human. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Before the woman could answer, the car's headlights flickered, and the radio turned on by itself, playing an old, haunting melody. The temperature inside the car dropped, and Sarah could see her breath. Panic set in. She tried to accelerate, but the car seemed to be moving slower, as if something was holding it back. She glanced at the woman, who was now staring straight ahead, her expression blank. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the middle of the road. Sarah slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car passed right through the figure, which vanished into thin air. She pulled over, her hands shaking. What was that? She whispered, more to herself than to the woman. The woman turned to her, tears streaming down her face. They call it the phantom passenger. It's a spirit that haunts this road, looking for lost souls to take with it. It can appear as anyone, a hitchhiker, a stranded motorist. Even someone asking for help. Sarah's mind raced. Are you saying you're? The woman nodded slowly. I died on this road years ago. I've been trying to warn people ever since, but the phantom passenger always finds a way to keep me here. Sarah's blood ran cold. She looked at the woman, truly seeing her for the first time. Her skin was unnaturally pale, her eyes hollow, and her clothes seemed to flutter in an unseen breeze. I'm sorry, the woman whispered. I didn't mean to scare you. I just wanted to help. Before Sarah could respond, the woman faded away, leaving the passenger seat empty. The temperature in the car returned to normal, and the radio switched off. Sarah sat there, trying to process what had just happened. After a few moments, she took a deep breath and started the car again. She drove slowly, her eyes scanning the road for any signs of the phantom passenger. The rest of the journey was uneventful, but the memory of that night haunted her for years to come. Sarah never took night drives again, and every time she passed by that old gas station, she couldn't help but wonder if the woman was still there, waiting for someone to help her escape the endless loop of the haunted highway.